Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar sponsored by Merck Animal Health entitled Traveling with Horses, What to Know. My name is Mandy Alexander, and I am the moderator for today's webinar, as well as the Marketing and Instruction Coordinator at the Pony Club National Office in Lexington, Kentucky. We encourage everyone to send in questions via the chat box during the webinar, and we'll have a Q&A session throughout the presentation. We would also like you to know we are recording today's webinar. The video link will be posted on the webinar page on our website within 24 hours. Keep in mind that you may need to download some additional software to view this recorded presentation. Today's webinar will be presented by Dr. Susanna Lewis, who is completing an internship with Haggard Equine Medical Institute's Sport Horse Program. She received her Doctor of Veterinary Medicine degree in 2015 from the University of Minnesota, where she also researched equine neuromuscular disorders. Dr. Lewis previously completed a PhD in neuroscience at the University of Colorado, investigating chronic pain treatments. Raised in Iowa City, Iowa, she became involved with horses at a young age, riding dressage to third level, and being a groom for traveling dressage horses for 5 show seasons. Now, here we go with the presentation. Please feel free to submit your questions throughout. We do appreciate everyone participating in our webinar today, and we encourage you to take our short survey at the end. Take it away, Dr. Lewis.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me tonight. My name, as Mandy said, is Susanna Lewis. I'm a veterinarian here in Lexington, Kentucky at Haggard Equine Medical Institute. And as Mandy mentioned, I also spent a number of years working as a dressage show groom, so I've had a fair bit of experience traveling with horses in a groom rider sense, and nowadays Haggard is across the street from the beautiful Kentucky Horse Park, so we see a lot of international and national shows and horses from all over. So we get a lot of experience with the health side of horses when they arrive at the horse park. And I believe next year is Mega Rally here at the horse park, so hopefully we'll see a number of pony clubbers there too. So to start off with, I'm going to divide my webinar into 2 parts. The first part, we're going to talk about preparing to travel, making a plan, preparing for departure when you're actually on the road. And then we'll kind of regroup, ask some questions at that point, and then we'll move on to the second part of common health concerns for the traveling horses, things we see a lot, and some steps you can do to reduce the risk for your horse. So first off, making a plan. So as soon as you know you're traveling somewhere, it's great to start making plans. And I know Pony Club is a huge fan of checklists, and I am too. So this is sort of some basic things you should think about. So your people plan. So before you even think about your horse, you need to kind of get the people organized. To know who is going to trail your horse, and if it's your family, you need to sort of look into your truck and trailer maintenance, make sure that's all up to snuff. If you're borrowing a trailer, it's something your horse hasn't been in before, I always encourage people to make sure their horse fits comfortably in the trailer if you have a larger horse. It sounds sort of silly, but I've actually seen a number of horses who develop some pretty significant loading and trailering issues from being sort of stuffed in a smaller stall in the trailer than they perhaps fit in. They should be able to raise their head comfortably up and down, and they shouldn't be pressed up against both the butt bar and the chest bar at the same time. So just something to consider. Of course, you need to make arrangements for your horse stabling wherever you're going. If you're going so far you have an overnight stop, you need to make reservations for that. Make sure the humans know where they're going to stay. Compile emergency phone numbers. So as a veterinarian, we often need to talk to the owner, not just the person with the horse. So anytime you're trailering horses, you should have phone numbers for all the owners and riders that are with you. It's great to have your veterinarian at home's phone number, the show veterinarian, and farrier. So anytime you go to a show, there's usually a prize list, and they'll list the show veterinarian that's on call for the show and the farrier. And then if you have any friends going to the show that are coming from the same direction as you, that's great to have as backup too. If you have a mechanical issue on the road, they can really help you out sometimes. Make sure you start planning your route, how you're getting from home to wherever your show might be, whether that's an hour away. You probably don't need to plan your route so much. But if you're going far enough to make some decisions or across state lines, you need to know that now. For instance, a lot of states, all states require a health certificate to go between states. Out west, you might have to consider whether you need a brand inspection. And then some states require, like Illinois, for instance, requires an entry permit that your veterinarian will need to get for any horses coming in. And your veterinarian also can look into whether there's any disease outbreaks that might limit horse movement. Occasionally, usually in the Southwest, there'll be outbreaks of diseases they want to contain, so they might limit horse movement or require additional veterinary veterinary approval before horses travel. And then, of course, I mentioned already, I love checklists. Make a packing list to make sure you have all your items. A lot of the preparation ahead of time is just to reduce stress and last-minute disorganization at the end, where it's a lot more unpleasant than if you plan ahead of time a little bit. So now that you have your people organized, we can start thinking about your horses. Before you take your horse anywhere, just stop, take a horsemanship moment, and think about if your horse is fit and healthy enough for this trip. I would say about 99% of horses are going to be fit and happy to go an hour or two away from home. When it gets farther and farther away, there might be more chronic conditions for an individual horse that might limit how far you want to take him or how much stress of travel you can safely put him under. For instance, you might have an older arthritic pony who really needs a lot of turnout, so shipping him all the way from California to Kentucky for Mega Rally would be a lot to ask of the horse. You want to talk to your veterinarian and see if they think it's okay for that horse to come. It might be, but you want to have a plan in place for how you're going to deal with any chronic issues your horse might have, and your veterinarian is going to be the best person to help you with that. Consider if your horse loads and stables well. If your horse is on 24/7 pasture turnout, totally happy, every now and then one of those horses really struggles when you can confine them to a stall. So if you know you're going to have to stable overnight, you might start getting your horse used to being in a stall. If your horse doesn't load well, find a good trainer to work with. You can see the Spurgus cartoon over here. He's having some loading issues there. You don't want to have that on the morning of the show. You want to have a plan already and some training to help your horse get more comfortable with that so it's not a stressful moment. And it's also a great idea to take some short local trips before doing a really long haul. Usually that is, most horses travel short distances, not long distances. So that's usually not a big deal, but just consider it. And then make sure your routine vaccinations are up to date and your Coggins is up to date. Talk to your veterinarian if they might recommend additional vaccines. Starting this year in 2016, USEF is now requiring influenza and equine herpes virus vaccination, which we call rhino. And so if you're going to USEF show, that's something you need to make sure you have taken care of. And you want to do this at least a month, if not more, ahead of time. All vaccinations are good that I've listed are good for at least 6 months to a year. It's because you want to avoid vaccinating within 2 weeks of travel or showing, because vaccine adds some stress and it can cause a fever that's not something you need to worry about necessarily, but would be a concern if you had a traveling horse that suddenly developed a fever. You don't want to make that a confusion whether it's the vaccine or the traveling that caused the fever. So we avoid vaccinating within 2 weeks of travel or showing. You want to sort of think about your farrier schedule if you have a particularly long haul, because obviously a thrown shoe at home is maybe a couple days inconvenience, but a thrown shoe at a horse show is a bigger problem. So you want to kind of, if you're going on a long haul to an important show or rally, you want to make sure you aren't doing that at the very end or right after your horse is trimmed and reset. And then also consider the typical weather or climate wherever you're going, because that will help guide your packing. For instance, Kentucky is very hot and humid in the summer, so sometimes we have horses from like either the northern U.S. or southern California, Colorado, places that are very dry that might struggle a lot in our heat and humidity. There's not a whole lot you can do to prepare your horse for that, but you can have a plan for how you're going to deal with it and know that it's coming. So now that we've had our 1 month plan, we sort of have a big picture plan in place. You're getting close to your time to leave. It's time to prepare for departure. So about a week before leaving, you're going to need to ask your veterinarian for a health certificate if you're traveling out of state. Health certificates in the U.S. are generally good for 30 days. So you don't need to do it the day before you travel, but you also can't do it too far ahead of time. You'll need to keep your health certificate and your Coggins together with the horse and the trailer it's going with, because that is something if you say are going into Florida, need to cross an ag station, anywhere en route, agricultural officers can ask you for that. And then if it's a USEF show now, we also need the letter saying that there's proof of flu or rhino vaccine, or there's a couple other routes to get that approval, which you can read about on the USEF webpage. You want to check your horse's shoes carefully, start paying attention to where they are in their shoeing cycle. Make sure you know what normal is for your horse, and take your vital signs for a few days before shipping just so you kind of know what they're like. And again, I think I've said this on every page, make a list and check it twice, just like Santa. You want to make sure that you have a plan and you've done everything you need to do, and this will really help you get a good night's sleep the day before you travel, because otherwise you're going to be running around like crazy trying to pack everything, and you're more likely to forget things that you need. that might be more for the people's sanity than for the horses, but it's important. And then finally, it's time to, wait, one more thing. So talking about what's normal for your horse. At rest, normal temperature is 99 to 101.5, pulse 28 to 44, respiration 8 to 24. Horses will vary within that. It's not usually a concern to us if they change until they change out of this range. And know that all three of those change pretty dramatically with exercise. So definitely take it when the horse is truly at rest and not when they're exercising. Less commonly known, horses usually poop about 6 to 7 times per day, and it can be more frequent. You want nice, moist, normal poop. I know horse people talk about poop far too often, but it's important. So this is nice, normal poop here. If you start to see really dry, hard fecal balls, that's a sign your horse is a little dehydrated. Or if they decrease the amount they're pooping, that's a sign there might be something coming. One of the big things I always stress is find and fix little problems so you don't have a bigger problem down the road. So keep your eyes open for the details, and you'll save yourself a lot of hassle in the long run. As far as water, a typical horse needs about 20 to 40 liters, which is 2 5-gallon buckets, or about 2 4-gallon buckets per day. And that's just a horse that's staying at stall doing nothing. Almost any time we travel with a horse, of course, we're asking to be athletes, or we're asking them to do something. So it can increase pretty dramatically with exercise, and then heat, any temperature over 65 degrees Fahrenheit, and they're going to need more water as well. So, and if you go up to a dry climate, they'll need more as well because they lose a lot of water and respiration. So all three of those conditions, you would need a lot more buckets of water, and you'd be amazed at how much water some horses happily drink. And then knowing your horse's quirks and unusual behaviors, I think some of the concerns we see from people who are being really attentive at horse shows is because they haven't seen their horse quite as often at home. Maybe they go to school or work all day and or board their horses out, so they don't spend as much time with their horse as they get to spend at a horse show. So they see things that might be totally normal for the horse or not a big deal, but they don't know that that's normal for the horse, so it makes them concerned. So anything you know about your horse. I knew one horse that liked to lay down at dinner time, and that would be a huge concern for a lot of horses, but this horse did it often enough and always got up at 8, and so it wasn't a concern for that particular horse. So just know what you can about your horse. If it's a newer horse to you, you'll learn as you go. And as more you know your horse, the better. Now we're finally ready to get on the road. So here's an example of one way to set up your trailer. There's a lot of good ways to trailer horses, so just because it's not this exact way doesn't mean it's wrong, or just because you and your friend might do it differently doesn't mean one of you is wrong. But these are some big points I want to make sure that are true of most situations. So I always like to ship in leather or breakaway halters, so if something happens, the horse's head isn't permanently affixed to the trailer. The leather will break, whereas a nylon halter won't. It's important that they have good footing to stand on so they don't slip. So a lot of trailers have nice mats, and then because horses urinate in the trailer, often a mix of shavings over top of that is great. People are very concerned about dust in trailers. Obviously, your horse is trapped in a box and is going to inhale whatever's floating in the air. So if you have a low dust bedding, that's great. I personally have done shavings and not had a problem, but that's kind of up to you. Again, there's more than one right way to do these things. Horses love road snacks, so I always hang a hay net. It keeps them entertained. It's great for their gut to just constantly eat and graze all day. It might drive you crazy when you stop your first rest stop and they've thrown all the hay on the floor and you have to put it all back in, but that's horses for you. They're having a good time doing it, I'm sure. A few people I've heard like to soak their hay to reduce dust. If your horse eats that, that's great. They'll probably get a little extra moisture too. Some horses don't like to eat soaked hay. Whatever you think is appropriate for your horse is fine. I always, except in the most brutal of cold weather, always open all the windows for ventilation and airflow. Ideally, you'd have screens on the back of your windows. A lot of trailers have little air vents on the top you can open. Anything to increase ventilation will improve the air quality as far as dust goes, and also improve the temperature, because I've almost always been surprised by how hot it gets on a trailer, because you have a lot of horse and heat in a small box. So I've never been surprised by horses being cold, but I have been surprised by how hot horses get in the trailer. And for that reason, I almost never ship in sheets, unless, again, it's the dead of winter. Insert carrots here. I added this because it's amazing to me that horses are so willing to hop on this giant rattling box and hurtle down the interstate knowing nothing about where they're going or even which way the truck's going to turn next. So I think it's great to give your horse a carrot or two and things. I'm sure they appreciate it. Water buckets, most short trips, there's no need to hang a water bucket. A horse is fine for a number of hours without water. But for longer trips, if you can, either hanging a bucket or stopping every couple hours to offer them water is a great way to keep them hydrated. It's kind of hard to see in this picture, but there is a bucket hanger sort of screwed into the side of the trailer, which is a really safe way to do it, because you want to make sure both with hay nets and buckets, there's nothing too low to the floor that a horse pawing would get its foot caught in it, or that anything would get tangled in the horse. So that's going to be a bigger problem than the hay net or the bucket was to start with. So again, making sure nothing's low enough for a horse to trip on. So that's the first. So we have a couple other tips for while you're on the road. Things I like to have readily accessible in the trailer, like the first thing you see when you open your tack room door are an extra halter and lead rope, because I've seen them break in the trailer and then you go to unload your horse and you need to find something to put on their head so you can get it. It's complicated. So always have an extra halter and lead rope handy. Scissors for anything you need, because scissors are very useful. And a pocket knife, something that's strong enough to cut through a hay net should a horse get their foot caught in it, which I've had to do a number of times. And then also know where your first aid kit is. So Pony Club has a first aid kit for rallies that you guys probably all know about. That's a great starter list. Depending on the experience level of the trainer or parent or whoever's with you, I might recommend a few additional things, but those are probably best talked about with your trainer and veterinarian, because it's sort of on a case-by-case basis what's appropriate for someone to have. I always like to bring water in the trailer, so if you get stuck longer than you think, you can offer your horses water, and then extra hay and enough supplies for one extra night for wherever you're going. I always write still on paper, because cell phones have a habit of dying at the worst possible time. Some basic directions for where you want to go and some emergency phone numbers so you can get help if you need it. And then people vary in how long they drive before they stop. I would say every 3-ish hours is sort of my goal. I think a lot of people take however long their trailer ride is and divide it in half, whether that's 3 hours or 6 hours. So they might stop halfway. Most trucks probably need gas within every 2 to 3 hours, so that's usually the limiting factor. So horses get a little break, and you can offer water if you don't have water in there. But I personally don't ever like to unload horses from trailers unless there's a major emergency. Generally, any highway rest stop you're going to be at isn't going to have a good enough fence between the horses and the interstate or major road to make me safe unloading them, feel safe unloading them. There will be people who recommend walking them around and letting them stretch their legs mid-travel. If that works for you, that's great. I would be concerned about horses spooking or getting loose or other issues when you're not at a horse facility. That's my thought. The other thing is don't distract the driver. Be very nice to them. Driving a trailer is stressful. For those of you who've done it, you know. It's a lot more to think about. So now is a great time to be really nice to your parent or trainer who's ever in the driver's seat. Offer them road snacks themselves and help them navigate, but don't squabble with your sister and don't cause a ruckus, because it's important that they have the ability to focus on the road. So that was sort of my first half. I thought I'd stop and see if anyone had questions on preparing and getting on the road with horses, and then we're going to talk about common health concerns for horses.
Okay, I do have one question. Someone said that they had heard throwing ice on the floor on the shavings keeps the trailer cooler. Do you believe that that is true?
I saw that Facebook post going around too. I think that's an interesting thing. I have never personally thought to try it, but I know the person who posted it is a rider from Florida, so they probably have more experience in hot weather than I do. I've seen people rig up small fans. I don't think that's necessary given that you have the ventilation of the road going by. But it wouldn't hurt to try. I don't think having wetter bedding when you get there is going to be a problem. So yeah, give it a try and let me know how it goes.
There you go. Okay. That seems to be it at the moment. You had 2 other questions, but you answered them within the within your presentation so far. So I think I give them a second to see if anybody types up anything. And I'm guessing that's a no, but if they have something that's pressing that's from the first part of your presentation, I'll just ask you. I'll see if you had a second in a minute, but otherwise that's it for the moment. So I think
all right. Sounds good. So the 4 main sort of injuries and health concerns we see in horses traveling are bumps and lumps, so the various injuries they can get on the road, and then managing stress, both physical and mental, maintaining hydration, and respiratory disease. So lumps and bumps are probably what people worry the most about and spend the most time trying to mitigate, trying to reduce the risk of. So the most common shipping injuries we see are cuts and scrapes. Not surprisingly, head and legs are the most common places to get them because they like to sort of flail about a bit, and they're the most mobile parts. So the main things we can do to protect against them, some people like to travel with fly masks on their horses, so if there's any flying debris, it's less likely to get in their eyes. You can see this trailer here has an open window because they're trying to get more ventilation in, but that runs the risk of something flying in the window. And then some people also like head bumpers, which protects the pole region here. And those are great if you have a trailer that's a little lower. You see here there's a lot of room between the horse's head and the top of the trailer. So the height of this horse means he doesn't necessarily need a head bumper in this trailer. If it were lower, that might be a great idea. Or if you have a horse that's more likely to either jump up or startle its head, that might be a good choice. And then leg protection is an often debated topic. I think, again, there's more than one right way to do it, so it's important to just know the pros and cons of whatever way you choose. So shipping boots are very popular. I like them because they come a little lower and a little higher than a standing rack comfortably can, so they can protect the knee a little bit, they can protect the hock a little bit. They're very easy on and off. You aren't going to make a mistake getting them on and off. And if something happens in the trailer and the horse gets one half off, they're Velcro, so they're just going to completely come off. You're going to find a trampled boot in your trailer, but you aren't going to find a horse that's tangled in its wrap. So I like them for that reason too. They do provide less support. Whoop. They can be hot. Obviously, they're padding, so they insulate heat somewhat. And not all horses tolerate it. So some horses, especially on the hind legs, hate this little bit that goes over their hocks, especially if it slides down a little bit, and then they start kicking, and then they're more likely to get hurt from kicking than they were before you even put the boots on. So that might not be a good choice for that particular horse. Another popular choice is standing wraps, and I would always add bell boots to these. I just couldn't find a quick picture of them when I was looking with bell boots. Bell boots, of course, protect them if they step forward or step sideways and step on their hoof or coronary vein. I think these provide more support. So if you have a horse that's prone to stocking up, they will probably help that. Usually it's something you already have in your tack cabinet, so you don't have to buy anything extra. Shipping boots can be pretty expensive, and so this is a great option for that. They do have a risk of tangling. As I mentioned, if they come half off, then you have a long piece that's attached to the horse and can get tangled in the other leg, and you kind of have a mess. So that's a risk. I think it traps a little bit more moisture than the shipping boots do. And in show horses, it's pretty not common, but one of the common things we see is a little dermatitis on the fetlock, and that can become actually quite painful and make wearing boots while ridden tricky. And I think that's because when they stand and stand wraps really long, it's sort of where the moisture cools. And it does have the risk of bandage bows. Even when correctly wrapped, sometimes things go wrong. And bandage bows are usually not a big long-term concern, but they can be a short-term concern where you get to show the night before and you suddenly find your horse comes off the trailer with one. So that's just a risk to know. And then some horses ship with no wraps at all. I love bell boots. I would add bell boots to this, especially if the horse has front shoes. This is actually how most commercial shippers who ship thousands and thousands of horses a year require horses to be transported, partly for the safety of the horses and partly for the safety of the drivers, because it's not very safe to try to get a horse off to take off wraps if they become loose or otherwise have to deal with all that. Obviously, horses tolerate it really well. It's nice and cool. It's their normal way, and horses are shipped without wraps and without problems a lot. But you do have no protection or support. Again, if you're traveling, if you're moving your horse across the country, you have a month to settle them in at a new farm. A few lumps and bumps are a problem. If you're going to a horse show and need your horse fit and ready the next day, lumps and bumps are a problem. So there you might be more inclined to put wraps of some sort on. Next up, I want to talk about managing stress and competition in traveling horses. Horses are creatures of routine. They would, in their ideal world, do the exact same thing at the exact same time every single day. So any time you change their environment, that could be a stressor. It might be mental stress of being a prey animal and nervous and new surroundings, all that, and the busyness of a horse show. Oftentimes the lights are left on all night for safety reasons, so then the horses don't get as much rest. That's all mental stress. And they can also have physical stress from the transport, from competing in their athletic endeavors, changing feed or feed schedules. All that can sort of combine to lead to a stressed out horse. So obviously we all love our horses and we want to do our best to manage their stress. But in addition to that, it's also some pretty good reasons to do it from a medical standpoint, because stress leads to the release of a hormone that causes changes in the body that lead to, for instance, immunosuppression. So you have less of an immune response, you're more at risk of getting sick, an increased risk of gastric ulcers developing, and decreased performance and rideability, because your horse is less happy when they're stressed. And we would all like to make them more happy. So a few ways we can do that is to keep the routine as similar as possible, feed at the same times, even for what you do at horse shows, travel. A lot of horses like to travel in the same stall in the trailer if possible, or just have the same routine when you get to the show as far as how you settle them in. All that helps them feel more at home. Same packing up routine at shows as you do at home. All of that kind of gives them that sense of familiarity and helps them feel more at home. When you have a new horse or a young horse, introduce them gradually and repeatedly to showing and traveling. You can't just go once a year and expect them to be great. It really helps to do small things first and then gradually build up and make sure they're really comfortable with it. Some horse personalities do great right from the get-go. Others really need a lot of time to learn that showing and traveling is fun. Whenever possible, avoid changes in hay and grain and bring your own. I know hay is bulky and heavy, so it can be difficult to travel long distances with it. But changing hay is a physical stressor to a horse and does, for a time, lead to a small increase in colic risk. If your horse is used to being turned out, hand walks and hand grazing are a great way to sort of be a mental break for your horse and give them, again, a little bit more like what you do at home. I've never heard a horse say no to hand walk and graze. If your grazing time is decreased, you can increase the hay feeding. So you might feed more hay at shows or feed smaller amounts more frequently because you're around more often. And older horses in particular often benefit from some nice walks, especially in the morning, to stretch their legs and kind of work the kinks out that they might do themselves and turn out in normal life. A lot of people that travel frequently with their horses will give UlcerGuard or GastroGuard to reduce the risk of stomach ulcers. You can talk to your veterinarian more about that. And then don't forget to help the humans de-stress too, because we translate our stress to our horses to some extent. So anything you can do to like plan ahead and make sure everything's set for the humans so no one freaks out more than they have to is great. The third health thing I want to talk about at shows and traveling is maintaining hydration. It's important to keep a horse hydrated, meaning drinking enough water, because first off, if they don't drink enough water, their feces become dry and hard, and then they're more likely to have an impaction colic, which we don't want, of course. And adequate hydration improves circulation, so your heart and vasculature, your kidney function, and your respiratory health, all of which are important to keep your horse healthy on the road. And it just supports peak performance. You're usually traveling for a reason, so it helps support your horse's ability to perform for you. It's important to know how to tell if your horse is dehydrated. One common way is to look at the mucous membranes and check the capillary refill time, which you can see this person here is doing. She'll remove her thumb and then count how many seconds it takes to refill from pale back to pink. You can also feel if the mucous membranes are really dry or pale. That might be a sign of dehydration. Monitoring, just keeping track of how they're drinking, urinating, and defecating. All of those will decrease if they get dehydrated. But even veterinarians, no one can tell if a horse is dehydrated until they're already 5% dehydrated. So that means there's a lot of minor dehydration that we never know about, but that may affect your horse in some way. So some tips to keep your horse hydrated. You can lead your horse to water, but you can't make him drink, is very true. You can hang a lot of buckets in his stall, but you can't make him drink if he doesn't want to. So first off, just give your horse time to relax and settle in. In most cases, a healthy horse won't dehydrate themselves to the point of having a medical problem. And they'll correct their dehydration simply by drinking water in their stall just like they do at home. So most of the time that works. If you're worried about it or you have a horse that gets worried and doesn't drink well on the road, giving them electrolyte paste or adding salt, just regular table salt to the grain, can encourage them to drink, just like drinking a bag of potato chips makes you want to drink yourself. But it's important, if you do give your horse electrolytes, it must have constant access to fresh water. So electrolytes aren't something you give just before you load your horse on a trailer without water on the trailer, because that won't actually help them drink. They'll just sit there with thirsty mouths. And, it can change some things inside as well. Bringing water from home when it's feasible, so it tastes similar. Usually you don't have to do this. Every now and then you have a horse that's very picky. It is great to have water with you in the trailer in case there's a delay. So in that case, at least having a bucket or two is a good start. Some horses, if they really hate the taste of a water at a new place, you can flavor their water. If possible, try this at home first so you know if they'll drink it. Apple juice, Gatorade, I've seen all kinds of things flavored. But anytime you do something to their water, always leave a clean, fresh bucket of plain water, because oftentimes that's what they end up drinking. You can feed a mash or soaked hay. That just adds more water to their diet, so they'll get a little bit more water that way. And if they're clinically dehydrated, such as their heart rate's elevated and not coming down and have a delayed capillary refill time, that's the time to contact a veterinarian. They might need more intensive fluid management or just veterinary attention if they get to that point. And finally, probably the biggest thing we see disease-wise in horses that travel is respiratory disease. So in a normal horse, they have this whole respiratory system that filters the air as it goes down. So that by the time they get to the lungs, less and less particulate, like little tiny dust particles and little tiny bacteria are present. And then this, the cells along here have these little hair things that help carry everything back up and out. So that's normally what they do. But when we trailer them, obviously we have their head up for extended periods, and so gravity is against you. Gravity is pulling everything down, and it can't come back up the way it would if a horse were happily grazing all day. Often trailers are dusty environments, so ventilation in trailers is really important to decreasing the number of particles that go down. And then stress, as we talked about, to reduce the immune response and make them a little more at risk for any disease. So the two categories of things we see are bacterial shipping fever and viral respiratory diseases. So the bacterial shipping fever, and these signs are actually similar to what you'd see with viral things too, would be fever, not eating well, lethargic, and you might see nasal discharge or a cough. If you notice any of these signs, it's time to contact a veterinarian. In particular, if a horse has fever or nasal discharge, isolate them until the vet can get there. That means keep them in a stall. Don't take them out to graze. Don't take them out to the wash rack unless there's an emergency reason to do so. Limit contact with humans, so have one, probably the rider, designated to take care of that horse that has limited contact to others. And wash your hands after you handle the horse. That's just in case the veterinarian finds an infectious cause that's a risk to the other horses around them. Once the veterinarian looks at it, he or she might tell you it's totally fine, you can go back to normal, or we'll be glad you already have these protocols in place, because we want to limit the risk to all the other horses that have come to the same horse show as you. In addition to the bacterial shipping fever, which is mostly due to keeping the head up and bacteria getting a chance to get in, when you do go to show or rally and you have a lot of horses mixing together, it puts them at risk for sharing viruses between them. Just like when you go to school, you're more likely to get sick than in the summer when you aren't around as many other kids. So often veterinarians will recommend vaccinating horses that are going to be traveling for equine influenza and equine herpes virus, EHV, which is often called rhino. And again, that's now required by USEF. If a horse at the farm is sick or has a fever, talk to your vet before you let any horse leave the property. That sounds dramatic, but it's often the best way to prevent major outbreaks and spread between barns. Avoid nose-to-nose contact with horses from other farms when you're traveling. I don't know why this always bothers me. So when people fill up their water buckets, they put the hose all the way in so it doesn't spray everywhere, but then the hose just gets in every single horse's nasal secretions as it goes by. So I like to let the water into the bucket without putting the hose in the bucket. Maybe that's a personal thing, but one small tip you can take away. And then when you're traveling, it's great to take your horse's temperature once or twice a day. That'll help you catch problems early. Like I talked about, that's my biggest horsemanship advice I can give you, is find and fix small problems before you have a big problem. So that's my talk for today. There's some other additional resources on biosecurity at horse shows, and then the Pony Club Rally First Aid Kit. If anyone has questions, I'd be happy to answer them now.
Okay, I do actually have two questions for you. Going back to the actual trailering. First person asks, do you feel on the highway that you should travel with the rear windows open if it's hot?
Personally, I do like that if you can, yes. I often would put fly masks on horses just to keep the dust and any flying debris down, but I think more ventilation is better because it gets really hot on trailers sometimes. So yes, I would recommend that.
Okay. The next question. Do you feel horses travel better for long trips? Do you feel they travel better in a straight load trailer or a slant load trailer?
That's one of those things you got a lot of different opinions on. I think it depends on the horse and the trailer to some extent. I like straight load trailers because I think they balance on points of their body that are a little bit easier for them to balance on. Other people will say the exact opposite. So I don't know that there's any conclusive research studies showing which way they prefer. I know someone did a study where they showed they preferred standing backwards to forwards, but that's the only actual evidence I know on that contentious topic.
Okay. Okay, and we have another question. How often do you recommend flu rhino vaccinations for horses traveling regularly throughout the year?
I believe it's usually every 6 months.
Okay.
And again, try to do it at a time when you're not showing a lot, so they can recover from the vaccine before you go.
Okay. Let's see. I think that's. Let me give it a second to see if we have some more of them pop up here, see if there's anybody that wanted anything more in depth. While we're waiting for a minute, I'll just go back and say thank you again to Merck Animal Health for being our sponsor for our webinar series. Thank you as well to you, Dr. Lewis, and then as well thank you to Haggard Equine Medical Institute for helping us arrange this webinar with you. It's been actually quite interesting. I learned some stuff tonight, and I've been showing horses my entire life. So
I learned some stuff putting it together. You're never too old to learn.
Yeah, exactly. I'm one of those ones that I hate to admit it, but I'm one of the ones that sticks the hose all the way down the bucket because I don't like it to spray in my face. And it's one of the things you don't think about. I honestly didn't think, and as soon as you said that, I went, you know, I've done that all my life, and it's probably, you know, I've gotten really lucky. So. Well, looks like you were so good. Nobody has any extra questions here. So, again, thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. And
thank you for having me.
We will have this posted again in about 24 hours. And everyone have a wonderful evening.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, I actually have one just pop in right as we're trying to go. She asked, in the picture of your proper trailer setup, the water bucket was hanging from a hook. She said, do most trailers have those?
So those, in that particular trailer, they bought the hooks. There's like a little bracket thing for buckets, and they just screwed them into the side of the trailer. They had a mechanic do that. I don't know that most trailers have them pre-installed, but that was a barn that was going to a lot of long shows.
There you go. I haven't been that lucky, honestly. I thought that was pretty cool, too. Okay, well. Then that's all. And again, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Have a good night. All right.
Bye.